February 1st, 1943, 25,000 feet above Nazi-occupied Europe. A lone Boeing B-17 flying fortress, riddled with over 200 bullet holes, one engine dead, another streaming smoke, limps toward the English coast. Half the crew is wounded. The tail gunner is dead. Yet somehow, impossibly, this fortress of aluminum and courage stays airborne. What if I told you that a single B-17 once returned to base with its nose completely blown off, the cockpit exposed to -50-degree winds at 25,000 feet, and both pilots flying while nearly frozen to death? And they still made it home. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why the B-17 Flying Fortress is considered the most resilient bomber ever built. And if you're a fan of WWII aviation history, hit that subscribe button. We're covering every legendary warbird from the greatest conflict in history. The B-17 wasn't supposed to be this tough. It was designed in 1934 during peacetime, when the worst threat Boeing engineers imagined was weather and mechanical failure. Nobody planned for it to fly through walls of flak, swarms of German fighters, and temperatures that could freeze a man solid. Yet somehow, this aircraft became synonymous with survival against impossible odds. The numbers are staggering. Over 12,700 B-17s built. More than 640,000 tons of bombs dropped on Nazi Germany. 291,000 combat sorties flown. But here's the statistic that truly matters. Nearly half of all B-17s that flew combat missions were damaged by enemy action year after year. Formations of hundreds of flying fortresses darkening European skies, their contrails writing the story of Germany's inevitable defeat across the heavens. But here's where it gets interesting. The B-17 almost never existed. In 1934, when Boeing proposed this radical four-engine bomber, the U.S. Army Air Corps wanted something completely different. The aircraft that would become America's most famous bomber was born from a misunderstanding, developed in secrecy, and nearly canceled before it ever flew. To understand the B-17, we need to go back to August 1934. The United States Army Air Corps faces a strategic dilemma that's been debated since World War I ended. Can air power alone win wars, or is it just support for ground forces? Brigadier General Billy Mitchell spent the 1920s arguing passionately that strategic bombing, attacking an enemy's industrial capacity, not just their armies, could decide conflicts before ground forces ever engaged. He was court-martialed for his trouble, but his ideas survived. By 1934, a new generation of Air Corps officers believes Mitchell was right. They just need the right aircraft to prove it. The problem is America's existing bombers are inadequate for strategic warfare. The Martin B-10, the most modern bomber in service, has a range of just 600 miles. It carries a mere 2,200 pounds of bombs. More critically, it's slow, barely 200 miles per hour, and virtually defenseless against fighters. Any theoretical strategic bombing campaign would require bases impossibly close to enemy territory, and the bombers would be slaughtered before reaching their targets. Here's the challenge. American military doctrine in 1934 assumes the next war will be defensive. The primary threat scenario is enemy fleets approaching the American coast, particularly the West Coast, where war with Japan seems increasingly possible. What the Air Corps needs, they believe, is a coastal defense bomber that can fly far enough offshore to intercept enemy naval forces before they threaten American cities. In August 1934, the Air Corps issues a specification for a multi-engine bomber capable of carrying a 1-ton bomb load for at least 10 hours at 200 miles per hour. The assumption is multi-engine means 2 engines, like every other bomber in service. The real requirement is range and endurance, the ability to patrol vast stretches of ocean searching for enemy ships. But there's a deeper problem that military planners don't fully appreciate yet. The bomber debate is theoretical because nobody has actually tested strategic bombing in modern warfare. World War I's primitive biplanes dropping small bombs on cities proved nothing. The technology has advanced dramatically, but the fundamental questions remain unanswered. Can bombers penetrate defended airspace? Can they hit targets accurately? Can they carry enough bombs to cause meaningful damage? Will they survive long enough to matter? The stakes are enormous. If strategic bombing works, air power becomes the decisive element in modern warfare. Nations could potentially win wars by destroying enemy industry and morale without massive ground campaigns. But if bombers prove too vulnerable, too inaccurate, or too limited in capacity, then billions of dollars in aircraft development will have been wasted on an ineffective weapon. In September 1934, three companies respond to the Air Corps specification: Martin, Douglas, and Boeing. Martin and Douglas propose practical twin-engine designs meeting the stated requirements. Both are solid, conventional aircraft that will do exactly what the specification asks. Boeing proposes something nobody requested, and something that will change warfare forever. But the solution would come from an unexpected place, and from a company betting its entire future on a radical design that ignored what the military said it wanted. Enter Boeing, a company fighting for survival in 1934. The Great Depression has devastated the aviation industry. Boeing's last bomber contract was years ago. The company is designing furniture and building speedboats to stay afloat. This military competition represents more than just a contract. It's Boeing's lifeline. Chief Engineer E. Gifford Emmons and his team make a decision that's either brilliant or suicidal. They ignore the specification's implied twin-engine requirement and design a four-engine bomber instead. The logic is compelling. Four engines mean redundancy, greater payload, longer range, and higher operational ceiling. But it also means dramatically higher costs and complexity that the military never asked for. Project engineer Edward Curtis Wells leads the design team working at a frantic pace. They have less than a year to turn concept into reality. The design philosophy is revolutionary for 1934. Build an aircraft that can defend itself. The name, Flying Fortress, isn't just marketing, it's a concept. Multiple machine gun positions covering every approach angle, creating overlapping fields of fire that will, in theory, make the bomber too dangerous for fighters to attack. The aircraft takes shape through summer 1935. All-metal construction, aluminum skin over an internal frame, far stronger than fabric-covered designs. 4 Pratt & Whitney Hornet radial engines, each producing 750 horsepower. A wingspan of 103 feet. 5 defensive gun positions, nose, dorsal, ventral, and 2 waist positions, initially armed with .30 caliber machine guns. Bomb capacity, 4,800 pounds, more than double the specification requirement. But here's the gamble. Boeing is spending its own money. The Air Corps hasn't ordered this 4-engine design. They've ordered prototypes from Martin and Douglas, not Boeing. Company President Claire Egtvedt authorizes spending $275,000, nearly bankrupting Boeing, to build the prototype anyway. It's a desperate bet that if they build it, the military will realize they need it. The prototype, designated Model 299, is assembled in secret at Boeing's Seattle plant. Workers construct the fuselage sections, install the engines, rig the control surfaces. The aircraft is massive by 1935 standards, 10 tons empty weight. A Seattle Times reporter, seeing it for the first time in July 1935, describes it as a flying fortress, and the name sticks immediately. July 28, 1935. Test pilot Les Tower climbs into the cockpit. Boeing's future depends on the next few hours. Tower advances the throttles, all 4 engines roar, and the massive bomber accelerates down the runway. At 1:15 p.m., the wheels leave the ground. For the next 2 hours, Tower puts the aircraft through basic handling tests. The results exceed everyone's expectations. The bomber is fast, reaching 236 miles per hour, significantly faster than any existing bomber. It climbs to 10,000 feet with ease. The controls are responsive despite the aircraft's size. Boeing has built something extraordinary. Now they just need the military to agree. However, what happened during the official evaluation would shock everyone involved and nearly kill the B-17 before it ever reached production. The first Model 299 took to the skies for official Army evaluation on August 20th, 1935, and immediately impressed everyone at Wright Field, Ohio. The Boeing bomber outperforms both competitors in every category: speed, altitude, range, bomb load. Military observers watch in awe as this 4-engine giant demonstrates capabilities that redefine what a bomber can do. The Martin and Douglas entries look obsolete by comparison. But then disaster strikes. October 30th, 1935. Test pilot Major Ployer Peter Hill and Boeing's Les Tower prepare for a final evaluation flight. Ground crews complete pre-flight checks. The engines start normally. Tower advances the throttles and the bomber begins its takeoff roll. At rotation speed, Hill pulls back on the controls. Nothing happens. The nose won't lift. The aircraft continues accelerating down the runway, but it won't rotate for takeoff. Tower and Hill pull harder, still nothing. They're running out of runway. At the last moment, Hill forces the aircraft into the air through sheer engine power, but the climb angle is dangerously nose-high. The Model 299 staggers into the air, barely flying, mushing through the sky at an impossible angle. Then it stalls. The massive bomber drops from 300 feet, impacts the ground, and erupts in flames. Hill and Tower are trapped in the cockpit as fire consumes the forward fuselage. Hill dies at the scene. Tower survives with severe burns but dies 13 days later. The investigation reveals a heartbreaking truth. The control locks, devices that secure the flight controls during ground operations, were never removed. A simple checklist item, forgotten in the complexity of operating this advanced aircraft, destroyed Boeing's prototype and killed 2 men. The Army cancels Boeing's contract. Martin receives the production order instead. Boeing's gamble has failed catastrophically. The company faces bankruptcy. But here's where things take an unexpected turn. A small group of Air Corps officers, led by Lieutenant Donald Putt, argue that the crash wasn't the aircraft's fault. It was pilot error caused by operational complexity. The solution isn't scrapping the design, it's developing proper procedures. These officers understand what the Model 299 represents, a quantum leap in bomber capability that America cannot afford to abandon. They find a loophole. While the Army won't order the bomber in quantity, they can purchase a small number for evaluation purposes. In January 1936, 13 aircraft are ordered under the designation Y-1 B-17. These evaluation models will prove whether a 4-engine strategic bomber is practical or just an expensive dream. Boeing engineers immediately begin modifications based on lessons from the crash. They develop the world's first comprehensive pre-flight checklist, a now universal aviation safety procedure born from tragedy. The checklist ensures every critical step is completed before flight. Control locks, fuel systems, trim settings, instruments, nothing is left to memory. The Y-1 B-17 aircraft arrive at various Air Corps bases throughout 1937. Pilots begin learning to fly this complex machine. The learning curve is steep. This isn't a simple biplane fighter. It requires coordination between pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, and gunners, radio communications between crew positions, engine management across 4 power plants, navigation over distances previously impossible for military aircraft. But something remarkable happens. Once crews master the aircraft, they fall in love with it. The B-17 flies smoothly despite its size. The 4 engines provide a safety margin that twin-engine bombers lack. Lose 1 engine, even 2, and the aircraft remains controllable. The defensive armament, while still relatively light, gives crews confidence they can fight back. February 1938. A formation of Y-1 B-17s intercepts the Italian ocean liner Rex 725 miles out in the Atlantic, a demonstration that bombers can find ships far from shore. The publicity is enormous. Strategic bombing suddenly looks feasible, and the B-17 is the aircraft making it possible. But its real test was about to come in actual combat, though not with American crews and not where anyone expected. July 1941. Britain stands alone against Nazi Germany, enduring nightly bombing raids while struggling to strike back. The Royal Air Force's Bomber Command flies night missions to avoid devastating losses to German fighters, but accuracy suffers in darkness. When 20 B-17C flying fortresses arrive in England on loan lease, the RAF sees an opportunity. Test whether daylight precision bombing is actually possible. The RAF designates them Fortress I and assigns them to number 90 Squadron. British crews train quickly on the American bombers, impressed by the spacious interiors, good visibility, and that critical innovation, the Norden bomb sight, a sophisticated analog computer that promises unprecedented accuracy. The theory is simple. Fly high enough to avoid most flak, use the defensive armament to ward off fighters, and place bombs precisely on German factories, rail yards, and military installations. July 8, 1941. 3 fortresses take off from Polbrook Airfield, targeting the port facilities at Wilhelmshaven, Germany. This is it, the first combat test of strategic daylight bombing doctrine. The bombers climb to 30,000 feet, higher than most German fighters can effectively operate. The formation crosses the North Sea, enters German airspace, and reaches the target. Flak bursts around them, black puffs of exploding shells that rock the aircraft but cause no critical damage. The bombardiers peer through their Norden sights, making final adjustments. Bomb bay doors open. The ordnance falls away. The aircraft turn for home, all three making it back to England safely. The mission is declared a success. The RAF conducts more raids throughout summer 1941, Brest, Hamburg, Berlin itself. Each mission provides valuable data. The B-17 can indeed reach heavily defended targets and return. Flying at 30,000 feet provides some protection from flak. The defensive guns occasionally drive off German fighters, but something troubling emerges in the mission reports. Bomb accuracy is terrible. At 30,000 feet, visual bombing is nearly impossible. Clouds obscure targets. Even in clear conditions, the Norden site's theoretical precision evaporates in reality. Of the bombs dropped, only a tiny fraction hit anywhere near the intended targets. One raid on Berlin places 0 bombs within the city limits. The RAF begins to question whether daylight precision bombing is achievable at all. Then German fighters adapt. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and FW-190s develop new tactics specifically for the high-flying American bombers. Instead of traditional stern attacks, they approach head-on at tremendous closing speeds, over 500 miles per hour combined velocity. This exposes them to defensive fire for mere seconds while allowing them to rake the bomber from nose to tail with cannon and machine gun fire. The B-17 sees relatively light defensive armament, mostly .30 caliber machine guns, proves inadequate against determined fighter attacks. September 1941. A raid on Oslo proves disastrous. German fighters execute coordinated attacks on the small formation. One fortress goes down over the North Sea, crew lost. Another crash lands in England with catastrophic damage. Of the aircraft that participate in the Norway missions, nearly half are destroyed or damaged beyond repair within weeks. The RAF reaches a harsh conclusion. The flying fortress, while impressive, cannot survive in defended European airspace without fighter escort. By April 1942, they transfer the remaining fortresses to Coastal Command for maritime patrol, a role far from the strategic bombing mission Boeing envisioned. The daylight precision bombing theory appears disproven. Even the mighty fortress can't do what strategic bombing doctrine requires. But the Americans are about to arrive in England with hundreds of B-17s and an unshakable belief that they can succeed where the RAF failed. The real story of the flying fortress is just beginning. This was just the beginning. What came next would cement its legendary status and prove that American determination could overcome what appeared to be tactical impossibility. By August 1942, the United States Army Air Forces established the 8th Air Force in England with a bold mission: prove daylight precision bombing works. The B-17 E and F models arriving in England are significantly improved from the early C variant. Heavier defensive armament with .50 caliber machine guns, additional gun positions including a tail turret, better armor protection, and self-sealing fuel tanks. But the real difference is American doctrine. Fly in tight defensive formations where overlapping fields of fire create a protective shield that no fighter can penetrate. August 17, 1942. 12 B-17Es from the 97th Bombardment Group take off for Rouen, France, the first American heavy bomber mission over occupied Europe. General Ira Eaker personally flies in the lead aircraft. They're escorted by RAF Spitfires. Range limitations prevent fighter cover deep into German territory, but this first mission stays within escort range. The target is a rail marshalling yard. The bombing is reasonably accurate. All 12 aircraft return safely. The American press celebrates the successful debut. But the Germans are watching, learning, adapting. As American raids push deeper into occupied territory, beyond fighter escort range, the Luftwaffe reveals tactics refined against RAF bombers. The Americans discover that tight formations, while providing mutual defensive fire, also make the entire group a predictable, slow-moving target. German fighters can position themselves precisely, attacking from angles where defensive fire is weakest. October 9, 1942. A raid on Lille, France costs 4 B-17s, over 30% losses. The mathematics are brutal: sustain losses at this rate, and no crew will survive the 25-mission tour required before rotation home. Pilots begin calculating odds with grim fatalism. Flying deep into Germany without fighter escort isn't heroic, it's statistically suicidal. Yet they keep flying. Throughout 1943, the 8th Air Force expands rapidly. Hundreds of B-17s now based across England. The targets grow increasingly ambitious. Submarine pens at Lorient, ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt, aircraft plants at Regensburg, the capital city of Berlin itself. Each mission writes another chapter in the bomber offensive's terrible arithmetic: bombs dropped, targets damaged, aircraft lost, men killed or captured. Stay with me because this next part is crucial. The B-17's reputation for toughness is earned through countless individual examples of incredible survival. March 1943. A B-17F named Aviation II is attacked by fighters over France. A 20 cannon shell explodes in the radio compartment, killing the radio operator instantly and blowing a hole 3 feet wide in the fuselage. The aircraft flies home, crew fighting fires and freezing wind for 2 hours. They land safely. May 1st, 1943. Fighting Lady takes a direct flak hit that tears away 6 feet of her left wing. By all engineering logic, she should roll inverted and spin into the ground. Instead, the pilot maintains control through sheer force, the asymmetric lift fighting him every second. He brings her home. Ground crews stare in disbelief at the damage. No one thought a B-17 could fly like that. The stories multiply. Bombers return with engines shot away, tail sections barely attached, hydraulics destroyed, gunners dead at their posts, yet still flying. Crews begin to believe the fortress is protecting them, that the aircraft wants to bring them home. It's irrational, superstitious, but psychologically essential for men who must climb into these bombers knowing they might not return. August 17, 1943, exactly 1 year after that first tentative raid on Rouen. The 8th Air Force launches 376 bombers against Schweinfurt and Regensburg simultaneously, the deepest penetration yet into German airspace. The plan is ambitious. Catch the Germans by surprise, overwhelm their defenses through sheer numbers, and cripple ball-bearing production critical to German war industry. But every legend has its darkest moment, and for the B-17, that moment is approaching with the inevitability of a death sentence. Despite its success, the B-17 wasn't invincible. By autumn 1943, the brutal mathematics of the bomber offensive force a terrible reckoning. The 8th Air Force is losing aircraft and crews faster than they can be replaced. The Germans have turned bomber interception into an industrial-scale killing operation, and the Flying Fortress, despite its legendary toughness, is dying over Germany in horrifying numbers. The fundamental vulnerability is simple: range. American fighters, P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, can escort bombers only partway to targets deep in Germany. Once the fighters turn back, B-17 formations fly alone into airspace swarming with German interceptors. For perhaps 2 hours, the bombers are defenseless except for their own guns. 2 hours where Luftwaffe fighters can attack with impunity, breaking formations, isolating crippled bombers, and systematically destroying them. The Germans develop tactics specifically designed to kill B-17s efficiently. The head-on attack proves devastatingly effective. Closing speeds exceed 500 mph, giving gunners barely seconds to fire before the fighter flashes past. But German pilots can rake the bomber from nose to tail with concentrated fire. The cockpit area, despite armored windscreens, remains vulnerable. Kill the pilots and the bomber is finished. Worse, the Germans deploy specialized destroyer aircraft. Twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110s and Me-410s mounting heavy cannons, 30 mm, even 37 weapons, that can obliterate a B-17 with a handful of hits. These heavy fighters attack from beyond .50 caliber range, firing into the bomber formations from positions where defensive fire is ineffective. A single 30 shell hitting an engine can tear it completely off the wing. A hit to the fuselage can cause catastrophic explosive decompression. Then there's flak. German 88 anti-aircraft guns throw up curtains of exploding steel at predetermined altitudes. Formations must fly straight and level during bomb runs. No evasive maneuvers, making them perfect targets. The black puffs of exploding shells look almost decorative from a distance, but each burst sends thousands of shrapnel fragments in all directions at lethal velocities. Flak doesn't need a direct hit. A near miss can shred control surfaces, puncture fuel tanks, kill crew members, or start fires. Human cost becomes unbearable. Crews watch as aircraft around them explode, break apart, or spiral toward earth-trailing fire. Sometimes parachutes blossom, men who will spend the rest of the war in prison camps if they're lucky, shot by enraged German civilians if they're not. Often there are no parachutes, the crew killed instantly or unable to escape the disintegrating aircraft. Each loss is 10 men, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, and 4 gunners. 10 families receiving telegrams that begin, "We regret to inform you." October 14, 1943, a date that will become known as Black Thursday. The target is Schweinfurt again. Intelligence indicates the previous August raid significantly damaged ball bearing production. Finish the job and German industry faces catastrophic parts shortages. 291 B-17s are dispatched. No fighter escort is possible for most of the mission. It's simply too far into Germany. The Luftwaffe responds with over 300 fighters. They attack in waves from the moment escorts turn back until the bombers stagger back across the German border hours later. The air becomes a chaotic nightmare of machine gun fire, exploding aircraft, falling debris, and parachutes. 60 B-17s are shot down, over 20% of the attacking force. Another 17 are damaged beyond repair. 650 American airmen are dead, wounded, or captured in a single day. The 8th Air Force suspends deep penetration missions immediately. The losses are unsustainable. Strategic daylight bombing, the doctrine that justified building thousands of B-17s, appears to have failed. Without fighter escort to German targets, the flying fortress cannot survive, no matter how tough its construction. Yet one mission would prove why this aircraft earned its place in history. A single bomber's story that embodied everything the B-17 represented: courage, survival, and the will to keep flying when destruction seemed certain. February 1, 1943. Bremen, Germany. A B-17F named All-American flies in formation with the 97th Bombardment Group, targeting German submarine construction facilities. The mission proceeds normally through the bomb run, ordnance away, aircraft turning for home. Then disaster strikes in a way nobody anticipated. A German Messerschmitt Bf-109 attempts a head-on attack but misjudges the closing speed. The fighter collides with All-American at over 400 miles per hour combined velocity. The impact is catastrophic. The Bf-109 disintegrates instantly, killing the German pilot. But the damage to the B-17 defies belief. The fighter's wreckage slices through the bomber's fuselage just behind the wings, cutting through the aircraft like a guillotine. The tail section remains attached by only the 2 lower longerons, structural beams, and a miracle of aerodynamic forces. Pilot Lieutenant Kendrick Bragg fights the controls. The aircraft wants to break apart, the tail section flexing violently, connected to the fuselage by mere inches of metal. The slipstream roars through the gaping wound, a 5-foot opening where the fuselage was severed. Crew members in the tail section are isolated, unable to reach the forward fuselage, staring at daylight through the gap below them. By every law of physics and aeronautics, All-American should break apart. The structural integrity is compromised beyond any design tolerances. But Bragg reduces speed, keeps the aircraft as level as possible, and incredibly, impossibly, maintains controlled flight. The tail gunner and waist gunners, trapped in the severed section, hold on as their world threatens to tear away into the slipstream. The flight back to England takes 2 hours. Every second the aircraft could break apart. Bragg cannot risk normal landing approach speeds. The additional stress would finish what the collision started. He brings the bomber in at barely above stall speed, touching down with a gentleness that seems absurd given the circumstances. The aircraft rolls to a stop. Ground crews arrive and stand speechless, looking at damage that shouldn't allow flight, let alone a successful landing. All crew members survive uninjured, except for the psychological trauma of flying in an aircraft that was essentially 2 pieces held together by determination and luck. All-American is scrapped. The damage is too severe for repair. But photographs of the severed bomber circulate worldwide, becoming one of the war's most iconic images. This is what the B represented, an aircraft that refused to die even when physics said it should. As the war progressed, the flying fortress would continue to evolve, and the solution to its greatest vulnerability was finally at hand. By early 1944, warfare was changing in ways that would finally allow the B-17 to fulfill its original promise. The game-changer arrives not as a new bomber variant, but as a fighter, the North American P-51 Mustang equipped with drop tanks. Suddenly, American fighters can escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The 2-hour window of vulnerability, where B-17s flew alone against massed Luftwaffe fighters, closes forever. The impact is immediate and dramatic. German fighters must now engage through screens of P-51s that are faster, more maneuverable, and flown by increasingly experienced American pilots. The Luftwaffe faces an impossible choice: accept heavy fighter losses trying to reach the bombers, or allow the bombers through unopposed. Either way, Germany loses. By spring 1944, American fighters are claiming more aerial victories than the bombers' defensive guns. The Escorts have become hunters, not just protectors. The B-17 itself continues evolving. The G model, the final and most produced variant, incorporates lessons from 3 years of combat. The chin turret mounted beneath the nose finally addresses the head-on attack vulnerability that killed so many crews. Twin .50 caliber machine guns in a powered turret can now engage fighters approaching from 12 o'clock. Additional armor protects vital crew positions. Improved oxygen systems allow extended operations at high altitude. But here's where it gets interesting. Late-war B-17s also carry technology that would have seemed like science fiction in 1942. H2X radar allows bombing through cloud cover. The Norden bombsight's dependence on visual targeting is finally overcome. Chaff, strips of aluminum foil dropped in bundles, confuses German radar, making flak less accurate. Formation flying becomes more sophisticated, with lead bombers equipped with specialized navigation equipment, while others simply follow and drop when the leader drops. Production reaches extraordinary levels. Boeing's Seattle plant, along with factories operated by Douglas and Lockheed Vega, produces B-17s at rates approaching 15 aircraft per day at peak output. Over 8,600 B-17 GS are built, more than all previous variants combined. The aircraft that nearly bankrupted Boeing in 1935 has become one of history's most mass-produced military aircraft. New roles emerge beyond strategic bombing. B-17s fly air-sea rescue missions, carrying lifeboats that can be dropped to downed airmen in the ocean. Some become drone motherships, controlling war-weary bombers packed with explosives and flown by radio into German targets. Coastal Command uses them for maritime patrol. Training variants teach thousands of pilots, navigators, and bombardiers their trades. By late 1944, the bomber offensive reaches its ultimate scale. 1,000-plane raids, multiple targets simultaneously, formations stretching for miles across European skies. German industrial production collapses under the sustained assault. Fighter production continues. The Luftwaffe isn't defeated in the air, but fuel shortages, pilot losses, and the destruction of supporting infrastructure render Germany's air force increasingly ineffective. The B-17 has become exactly what Billy Mitchell envisioned 2 decades earlier: the weapon that can win wars through strategic air power. And then came the moment that would define its legacy: the final missions as Nazi Germany crumbled beneath Allied might. When the war ended in May 1945, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress had written its name into history with statistics that stagger the imagination. Over 12,730 B-17s built across all variants. More than 640,000 tons of bombs dropped on Nazi Germany, roughly half of all bombs delivered by American aircraft in the European theater. 291,508 combat sorties flown. The human cost was equally staggering: 4,750 B-17s lost in combat, representing over 47,000 American airmen killed or missing. The final missions over Germany in April 1945 are almost anticlimactic. German air defenses have collapsed. Luftwaffe fighters rarely appear. They lack fuel, experienced pilots, and operational airfields. B-17 formations fly unopposed to targets that are often already overrun by advancing Allied ground forces. The bomber offensive has evolved from desperate battles against overwhelming opposition to methodical destruction of a defeated enemy's remaining infrastructure. April 25, 1945. The last major combat mission, attacking rail yards and ordnance depots in Czechoslovakia. By early May, bombing missions cease entirely. Germany surrenders on May 8th. Thousands of B-17s sit on English airfields, their combat careers finished. Some crews have completed their tour, others are partway through. All share the profound relief of having survived. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Most B-17s never return to America. The cost of shipping them home exceeds their peacetime value. Thousands are flown to collection points and scrapped, melted down for aluminum. Aircraft that survived flak, fighters, and mechanical failures are destroyed by blowtorches and scrap dealers. Crews watch their bombers, machines they trusted with their lives that carried them through impossible situations, cut apart and reduced to raw material. Some B-17s find continued service. The U.S. Navy operates them for air-sea rescue and maritime patrol into the 1950s. Several South American countries purchased surplus fortresses for patrol and transport duties. France uses them for search and rescue. The Israeli Air Force flies B-17s during the 1948 War of Independence. Ironically, some of these aircraft are purchased from scrapyards and rebuilt by volunteers. The B's most lasting legacy isn't military. It's the thousands of men who flew them and returned home to build post-war America. These airmen carried memories of frozen skies, burning comrades, and aircraft that refused to quit. They became the foundation of America's commercial aviation industry, aerospace engineering programs, and military leadership. The lessons learned operating complex four-engine aircraft in combat conditions directly influenced post-war airline operations and aircraft design. Today, only a handful of B-17s remain airworthy, perhaps a dozen worldwide. They appear at airshows, their four radial engines producing that distinctive sound that survivors recognize instantly. Museums preserve dozens more: the Smithsonian, the Air Force Museum in Dayton, the Imperial War Museum in Britain. Each aircraft represents not just a machine, but the 47,000 airmen who never came home and the tens of thousands who did. What impressed historians most wasn't just the aircraft's toughness. It was how the B-17 proved that strategic bombing could fundamentally change warfare, despite the terrible price paid to prove that theory. Looking back, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress was more than just a machine. It was the aircraft that validated strategic bombing as a war-winning doctrine, forever changing how nations think about air power and military strategy. The B-17 proved several revolutionary concepts simultaneously. First, that heavy bombers could penetrate defended airspace and survive, provided they had proper tactics, defensive armament, and eventually fighter escort. Second, that sustained strategic bombing could cripple an industrial nation's capacity to wage war. German production actually increased through 1944 despite the bombing, but imagine what it would have been without the offensive. Oil refineries, transportation networks, aircraft factories, all faced continuous disruption that Germany could never fully overcome. Technologically, the B-17 pioneered innovations that became standard in aviation. The comprehensive pre-flight checklist born from tragedy is now universal procedure for every aircraft worldwide. The concept of fail-safe redundancy, multiple engines, backup systems, structural over-engineering, became fundamental to aircraft design philosophy. The Norden bombsight's technological sophistication pushed the boundaries of mechanical computing. Most significantly, the B-17 demonstrated that air power could be decisive without ground invasion. This concept shaped Cold War strategy, nuclear deterrence theory, and modern warfare doctrine. The idea that wars can be won from the air, controversial in 1934, proven by 1945, remains central to military planning today. The human dimension matters equally. The 350,000 American airmen who flew in 8th Air Force bombers faced odds that would be considered unacceptable by modern standards. 25-mission tour where each mission carried roughly a 5% chance of death or capture. Yet they kept flying, kept fighting, kept believing in the mission. Their courage, combined with the aircraft's legendary toughness, created a legacy that transcends statistics. The B-17 wasn't invincible. 750 shot down proves that. But it was resilient, adaptable, and ultimately successful in the mission it was built to accomplish, taking the war to Nazi Germany and proving that Hitler couldn't stop the bombers, no matter how desperately he tried. So there you have it, the complete story of the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. From a controversial four-engine gamble that nearly bankrupted Boeing to the bomber that flew 291,508 combat missions and dropped 640,000 tons of bombs on Nazi Germany, this aircraft proved that strategic air power could win wars, at a terrible price, but decisively. 12,731 B-17s were built, crewed by over 350,000 American airmen, achieving what many thought impossible: sustained daylight precision bombing deep into the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. It remains one of the most significant combat aircraft ever built, not just for what it accomplished, but for how it changed warfare forever. The stories of survival, aircraft returning with catastrophic damage, crews flying on 3 engines, 2 engines, even 1 engine, aren't just tales of tough machines. They're stories of human courage, of pilots who refused to abandon their crews, of gunners who kept fighting despite wounds, of navigators who guided crippled bombers home through weather and night. The B-17 earned its nickname not through invincibility, but through resilience, the will to keep flying when everything said it should fall. What impressed you most about the Flying Fortress? The engineering brilliance, the combat record, or the courage of the men who flew them? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more deep dives into WWII's greatest aircraft, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching WWII Aviation, and I'll see you in the next one.